If they allowed them to stay, that influence would eventually cause them to sin against God, to violate the covenant that they had made with him. They would be unable to live as his people if they allowed them to stay. So when we get to our primary text this morning in Deuteronomy, because that's what our whole series is on, we see that Moses' biggest concern, right? We're going to look at Deuteronomy 18. We see here what his biggest concern was for these Israelites if they did not drive them completely from the land. Look at what it says in Deuteronomy 18, verses 9 through 14. He says, "When you enter the land that your God is giving you, be very careful not to imitate the detestable customs of the nations living there." Verse 10, "For example, never sacrifice your son or daughter as a burnt offering, and do not let your people practice fortune telling, or use sorcery, or interpret omens, or engage in witchcraft, or cast spells, or function as mediums or psychics, or call forth the spirits of the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. It is because the other nations have done these detestable things that the Lord your God will drive them out ahead of you. But you must be blameless before the Lord your God. The nations you are about to displace consult sorcerers and fortune tellers, but the Lord your God forbids you to do such things." So here we see Moses saying that when they enter the promised land, they've got to be careful, right? They've got to keep their defenses up. And not so much their military defenses, because God's going to go before them and he's going to help them drive these nations out. The defenses that Moses is telling them they need to keep up was a defense against the influence of those living in the land. He gives them some examples of detestable customs, as the New Living Translation puts it. Other translations use the word abominations. Right? These were practices that were so wicked and so evil in God's sight that they are called abominations. They are detestable to God. And he gives some examples of what some of these detestable abominations are. He says in verse 10, he said, for example, never sacrifice your son or daughter as a burnt offering. Right? You have to understand something. One of the reasons God was bringing judgment on the Canaanites and all the other nations that were living there was because of their worship of a false god named Molech. Right? And of all the pagan deities in antiquity, the cult of Molech was probably one of the most wicked and one of the most perverse and one of the most horrific in their practices and in their worship. Those who worshipped Molech would often build these bronze statues that would have like at least